Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Untitled Reviews. Once again, temporary name. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the season finale of Dispatches from Elsewhere. A great season finale, a great episode. There's a lot to take away from this episode, so, to kind of break down. So, obviously, we start with the boy. And, last episode, I was wondering, I was like, is the little boy supposed to be Peter? I wasn't sure about that. And then it's like, we get introduced to the boy. It's like, oh, he sees all these people on TV, so he wants to be an actor. He brings it up to his parents. It's like, oh, it's going to be a hard thing. And he's like, I know, but I'm going to put it in work. And we see him doing that. He wants to be a funny actor. He wants to be a serious actor. He kind of wants to do everything. He wants to do all of it. And obviously, he kind of gets picked for, he goes to this funny audition. He puts on some clown and he puts on a performance, make him laugh. And he does his whole thing. And then one of the dudes there, I guess he's like a producer or whatever the case may be, starts clapping. Side note, I have to look into it. I'm fairly certain isn't that the actor who played Niles from The Nanny? I'm fairly certain that's him doing an American accent too. The fact of the matter is, I'm fairly certain that was him, but nevertheless, he takes it. He's like, "Oh, you got something special. You're special, boy. Oh, here's that chocolate milk," which is interesting because in my mind it was like, "Oh," I was like, "Oh, like Clara." I was like, and then we also found out later on it's like, "Oh, he's Octavio." So I was like, "Wait." So it's like, so I was like, "Is this the real world?" Because it made it seem like Clara, okay. So at first it seemed like Clara created this whole Elsewhere game, and then it's like, I was like, okay, so I was like, was the one really behind all this actually Peter? Because she was only living out what she created, what Peter was trying to, deal with all his stuff. So I was, like I said, it gets confusing to a certain extent because this episode got super meta and it blew my damn mind. Okay, so. But the way that's set up, I was like, okay, and he keeps putting on the performance. It's a little animated thing of him too, drinking chocolate milk, because eventually he starts getting more and more taken down by it. But he starts drinking chocolate milk like he's drinking whiskey, and it's like, what the? Oh, I was like, oh, I guess they're trying to, because he's a kid and everything, so they're trying to keep this a little friendlier. But eventually the performances take its toll on him. He kind of doesn't want to do it anymore. He's like, oh, maybe I can do something different. And I think this in itself is kind of a metaphor for obviously it's kind of you kind of get pigeonholed into a certain thing. It's like, oh, you become known for this one thing and you want to do something else, but it's like people are like, no, this is the cash cow, keep going, we're going to keep going, and we're going to keep beating this dead horse, excuse obviously the crude metaphor, but the fact of the matter is, he just kind of goes with the flow. He's like, okay, and he puts on one final performance and he ends up landing. Because I felt like, oh, things are probably going to end bad because you're drinking a shit ton of chocolate milk. And I'm like, and the performance didn't go well. He was sluggish and just the performance wasn't great. The moment he hit the stage, everyone just got up. I was like, part of me is like, no one's going to go over there to check to see the kid didn't die from that. But it's like, no, he's okay. Threw some cash at him and that was it. But then we come out of it and it's like, oh, we see what I was like, oh, is this Peter? And it's like, oh, and then he brings up the fact is his name Jason. I was like, wait. You're playing yourself? And then later on, because I wasn't sure until later on when the lady was like, oh, Mr. Siegel. I was like, so he is playing himself. I was like, once again, the meta in this is nuts. So I'm like, okay. So at first I was like, is that a hyperbole supposed to be a representation of his struggle and stuff like that? I was like, oh, is it supposed to be it was a metaphor, but truth be told, it was about him having a drinking problem, but that was him as a kid, chocolate milk and stuff like that. But when in actuality, because it seemed like he was in a AA meeting, but it was because stuff in the episode was like, wait, are we talking that is Jason Segel playing a fictionalized version of himself, or is he kind of in a way metaphorically dealing with some shit that I've never looked too deeply into Jason Segel's life. I try not to look into actors' life because that's their lives. So I don't know if because how in Ben Affleck, with the whole, what's the movie called, that movie he did this year, it's called A Way Back, I think, the basketball movie. A lot of people talk about the fact is that movie is a kind of very close to Ben's life, so it's almost enacting certain aspects, kind of the sadder aspects of his life, stuff that he was dealing with at the time. So I was wondering, is Jason doing the same thing? I don't know. But obviously he's like, yeah, he spent so much time making people laugh, and he's like, honestly, I don't see anything funny anymore. So he's kind of, he's lost, very much like Peter is, but obviously very different degrees. And so he ends up meeting, at first I was like, oh, that's Simone. At first I was like, oh, that's Eve, isn't it? Because like, we're going to break the meta of like, I was thinking like the meta of it was going to be like, oh, this is going to be Jason meeting Eve, meeting Sally, meeting Andre. Like, I thought that's what it was going to all be. And it's like, all this was like the whole show was like a metaphor for what was real. I thought this was going to be the real life thing of like what that was like a metaphor of. But it's like, what's your name? And she's like, my name's Simone. I'm like, what? In that moment, I was like, I was confused. I was like, wait, so you're really Simone? So I'm like, but then like, I was like, oh, last episode, I was like, maybe this is a thing where he thinks he's Jason and then he's really Peter, but they said they want to come along with him on this journey and stuff like this. So this is their way of helping. But like that barn of beautiful things and all the stuff. She's like, oh yeah, this is stuff from like a past life and stuff like that. Little winks and nods to like stuff from the adventure and everything. But she's the one that points Peter towards the elsewhere visit. He goes there. The lady who's from the first episode, who was a little creepy, you see her kind of bring up that creepiness again. He goes there and he kind of gets put on this adventure. So it's almost like reliving the whole elsewhere experience for like what we experienced over the course of the series. Him kind of following these clues and everything. I love that he ends up running into the lady that's from the restaurant that the gang hangs out in, and you're like, huh? I was like, that's like I said, the meta was too much, and I was getting confused. But then he goes up there and he plays an arcade game. And obviously, at first he's having fun because he ended up figuring it out like, oh, you just kind of, sometimes you got to burn, baby. And so he jumps into the lava and that gets into the next level. But it starts asking questions about, like, is he afraid? Is he staring off into the void? And I keep forgetting the question. It was like, what was like the most important, the single most important like question like you have to ask yourself or something. And it's like, what to do next was it. And he was like, oh, this is about me. And he meets Janice. And Janice is like, oh, I don't really know Simone. The fact is she came here. The whole point of the game is for you. Once you've completed the whole thing, you pass it on to the next person. And and to me, I love the line of you are special, but your uniqueness isn't what makes you special. What makes you special is the fact is you're just like everyone else. That basically, and I like that, the basic understanding is like what you're going through you're not special in that regard, because what you're feeling or what you're going through, there are other people out there who are like that. So like we had this feeling of like, oh, like when we're sad, like, it's like, oh, no one else is going to understand this. Plenty of people will understand because other people are like you. They're going through the same thing. Like we like to think that we're so different from people, but at the same time, despite everything, we are so similar to one another. And I just thought that was just kind of a beautiful message that, because she's like, and Janice being like, oh, and that's perfect. Because I talked about that countless times, like how humans are perfectly imperfect, and it's just like, and then we see 4 months later, and he's writing a script and everything. And once again, this is the actual Jason Segel, because it seems like they actually like take jabs. I don't know whether that's him taking jabs at himself, because like this is a very like self-referential, like I said, like the meta to this is nuts, because like later on he runs into the kid version of himself who's poking fun at him, because it's like, oh yeah, like it basically even says like, oh, you want to write another Muppet movie, you come find me. So because basically Simone was like, oh yeah, it's good. She's like, I really like it, but the fact of the matter is, like, you're very harsh on all the other characters, and you play the victim a lot in your story. You want to make like, oh, woe is me, like everything's against me. And obviously he's like, oh, okay. She's like, are you mad? He's like, no, I'm not mad. Like, this is all like the face of someone that's mad, because he was excited at first, but then, I think we can all get that. Like, I think a lot of people, myself included, I'm not very good at taking criticism, because I'm very like self-deprecating. So the moment someone's like, oh, this is like, I'm like, yeah, it's terrible, it's shitty, I know it, I knew it from the beginning, I shouldn't have ever tried. Sadly, I'm kind of like that. So I think that kind of hit me in the point of kind of being like, I can kind of get it, because someone not like her kind of pointing stuff out, because it's just kind of like, because basically her whole thing was kind of like that he isn't really taking responsibility in the story and everything. But then he confronts himself, because she's like, release me. And he's like, yeah, I heard you first. And he's like, sorry, I needed to get your attention, because he's like, basically his younger self is like, you're on this woe is me shit. Like, the fact of the matter is, no one forced you to do any of that stuff. No one forced you to drink. Like, you made choices. Take responsibility for your choices. Like, yeah, sadly things didn't work out the way you, and you kind of found yourself in kind of this self-wallowing pity. But the fact of the matter is, this isn't on anyone else. This is on you in particular. So I just thought that was such a fascinating, like, it's like, basically deal with your shit. Like, yes, you're still a mess, but the fact of the matter is that you are willing to kind of like look within yourself and see like, oh, like, I'm kind of the cause of all, like, looking inwards is kind of the first step. It's kind of what it was. So, and then we see him in front of, I'm assuming, supposed to be Fredwin, not unless it's actually supposed to be Andre. That's, like I said, I'm confused by it. I'm assuming it is supposed to be Fredwin, but he's like, okay, and it's like he's explaining the whole thing about the Elsewhere thing, and he looks and turns and he sees Lee and Clara, and so it becomes a thing of like, because Fredwin is like, oh yeah, I'm really interested in this because it is something. It's funny, it's dark, it's scary. There's so much of this story. Like it has like I said, it has its laugh, it has its heartfelt moments, it has its scary moments, because like it's like, oh, like Clara and everything. I like, oh, maybe Clara actually died, or something happened to her. So, but I just thought that was really interesting, and it's just like, for Jason to be like, and say what he said, because I'm not going to do it justice saying all the stuff that he said, but it hit you in a certain way. You're like, holy crap! Like I said, this meta is nuts. And then the screen pulls out, and it's like, oh, Peter and Simone, Jason and Simone watching, and then it pulls out even further, and it's them watching it. And I love in that instant where it's just kind of like, and I'm assuming I don't know if it's supposed to be Andre or whether it's supposed to be Fredwin, but it's just kind of like, oh yeah, like, it's good. It got a little self-indulgent and stuff like that. And even Janice, maybe Sally, was like, oh yeah, like, even that final episode, because it kind of just got a little like caught up, on, Jason. And she's like, I thought this whole thing was about community. And Simone, or maybe Eve, was like, yeah, wasn't that kind of the whole point? And it's like, oh, no. Like, the fact is, and I love him being like, well, yeah. And then he turns to start talking to the audience. I'm like, dude, stop. You're blowing my mind, bro. Stop. So basically, he's like, okay, so it is a little self-indulgent if this were, he's like, because the story isn't about me, good, and even Sally or maybe Janice was like, oh, it kind of seemed that way. It's like, no, this isn't about me, this isn't about us. It's like, well, it isn't about you or me. It's like, it's about kind of us, because he's like, I want you, this, taking along with this program, I would never want to end it in a way where it just became all about me. And he brings out the crew. He's like, this is the cast and crew of Dispatches from Elsewhere. So he had final monologue from Octavio, and it was really insightful, the whole situation. Like I said, this was like very like referential. Like I said, it was basically, like I said, in a way, because Jason Segel is the one who created this. Like, obviously it's based on like a documentary, but like he created this show, so it's like, I guess he found an outlet to take inspiration from that and kind of use it as like because it's a show within a show within a show within a show, and it's like we're on some Inception level of just like, how deep does this go? Are we like 4 shows deep into like the meta of what the show is? It hurts my brain a little bit. That's why I'm like, I should have watched the episode a second time before recording this, just to kind of get everything down. But I'm like, I was so interested to see like, okay, so where are we gonna go? Like, what direction is this going to take? Because that's what the whole point was, like, to figure out, like, was the show real? Was it fake? At this, the entire time it's like, oh, it makes you seem like it's real, but then it turns out, oh, it's all fake. But then it's like, oh, maybe there's something real to it. Oh, but then it's real, but it's made fake. With the whole Lee thing, and now it's like, oh, there's a level beyond that, because there's Jason, and he made this show, and it's like I said, it's a show within a show within a show, and it's just, my God. I know this is probably terrible for anyone that's listening. I'm sorry. It's just, like, these are my raw emotions. I literally just finished the episode before recording this. So, like, that's why you're getting my raw reaction to all this. So that's all I can say, because it kind of left me a little speechless. But regardless, the whole point, the whole thing of like, this isn't just, because even being like, oh, we got the audience involved, and it's like, it isn't, and Octavia being like, I told you I only lied once. Actually, I lied the entire time because I said Peter was you. I said Simone was you. I said Janice was you. I said Fredwin was you. That was all a lie because you are you. And I thought that was so interesting because, and especially when he breaks it down and being like, yeah, like the fact of the matter is, we kind of get so, I think, so caught up in just the you of us all that it isn't just a you, it's a we. Like bringing it back full circle to the whole point of it being about community. That the fact of the matter is, we're able to bring about change in ourselves because of like basically kind of our energies meeting with other people that we meet along the way. And use an example of like that water in like the tank. It's like, even if you take that water out and put it in a glass, it's still the same water, showing that despite the differences and stuff like that, we as people, we are the same. And, saying that like, oh, these things are made from the same thing too, like, the glass and the tank, and then they disappear and just the water comes together, meaning like, despite the outside shells that we are, like, on the inside, we are the same. We all go through the same things, whether we feel like we're like, we like to separate ourselves into being like, oh, we're this water in this glass of like, oh, we're kind of ourselves. But it's like, in actuality, moving aside all the glass that separates us, we are all that same water, So, and like I said, everyone being like, saying their name and saying that they are you, and then it's like, no, it's not just you, you are we. It's just, like I said, it's just, I probably should have watched the episode a second time just to kind of do this all justice, because I'm sure I'm bumbling my way through this, but I apologize. But it is one of those things of like I said, when you watch this show, you can pull, like, because I've talked about it, like, I can see myself in Peter, Fredwin's, Simone, and Janice. I saw myself in those characters. Like, there are certain aspects to them that I resonated with, and so in that moment, like, that I feel like that statement of just kind of like, you're unique, you're special because you're like everyone else. That the way I feel sometimes is the same way other people feel too. That you're kind of not alone in this. That we kind of basically that we are in this together. Kind of, and it's very like therapeutic in a sense, and that's why I'm wondering, is this what this was supposed to be for Jason Segel? I'm actually kind of interested to read more into like what really was like the inspiration behind this, and it's very beautiful behind like the messages, stuff like that. Like I say, it's weird just because of the deep level of meta to it all, but I think the message still resounds very nicely. So I don't know. That's really all my thoughts to it, So I still think it was just kind of a beautiful way to kind of end things off, At the time of me recording this, it hasn't been announced whether or not Dispatches from Elsewhere is coming back for a second season. The show is an anthology, so you can easily see them like going down a completely different route of like characters and the story. But I'm so curious because of the meta of this story. Like, what would a new season look like? What would it be like? This was kind of like, Jason kind of injecting himself into his own story is kind of what I was kind of reading somewhere. So that makes you wonder, like, would someone kind of take over in season 2 to potentially inject themselves in a story? Would it be the same kind of similar way of like using this Elsewhere game, or will you take what was set up in this season and done this season, and will you kind of build off of it? We're going to go another level of meta of like, Jason, we love what you did with Dispatch. I butchered that. Dispatches from Elsewhere. So we're going to, we're thinking of doing this and that. Like, I'm wondering, is there, like I said, another layer to this Inception-ish level of things? Like, would there be another level of just being like, we get super like meta about it and just kind of be like, oh, people have their own ideas about like what Dispatches should be, and it's almost kind of like finding yourself again when everyone else, and it still kind of applies to this season, but kind of finding yourself again when everyone else thinks they have such a clear-cut idea of like, oh, this is what this should be, oh, you doing this, great. Because I don't know what to really, make of it. Like I said, I legitimately have no idea what you would do for a second thing. This and that, sure, but it's like, I don't know. I feel like I would be like, even the ideas I have, I feel like just aren't, I don't know. Like, I think you'd have to do it like very well thought out, and I'd be so curious to see like how you would handle a second season, because I get the feeling like, this on its own can easily stand on its own, but I'm so curious to like see like would you make a season 2 that stood on its own? Would it be tangentially connected? Would we see recurring characters? Would it just be a situation of no, it is up its own? Like this is its own package thing. Like I mean, much like any anthology. Like I'm so curious how you would go about it. And like I said, what other potential other people and characters, like would it be like actors we are familiar, because like I said, like with the exception of the actress who plays Simone, like I'm familiar with Jason, I'm familiar with Sally, I'm familiar with Andre, so it's kind of a cast of actors I feel like would they go more less known actors, would they go like actors like, oh, I definitely recognize most if not all these people, it crosses my mind with certain regards like that. But regardless of it all, I think it does kind of make me a little sad too, because it's like a show within a show, because part of me it's like, oh, but Simone and Peter. Oh, I mean, to be fair, it's just like, well, it still exists in the confines of the show, but then like the show is a show within a show, so it's just kind of like it breaks it a little bit, because you're like, what? Because I'm the hopeless romantic, and it's like because the sad thing is it gets too much in my own head where I'm like, yeah, but that also makes it so that it's like, I know it's stupid to say it's not real. I know it's stupid to say, because it's like, oh, this is a show within a show. So it's like, at the very least, I want it to be like, oh, this is a true story to this world and these bonds that they created, which those bonds still exist because of, them actually filming this show within a show, within a show, within a show. Like, I cannot put it into words, but it's just that thing of just kind of like, oh, that's just part of a show, and it's not like their story. You get it? It's not Simone and Peter's story because they're just characters on a show. I know how stupid it sounds. Like I said, I can't put it into words. Like, yes, I recognize something as a show, but the fact is for it to be a show within a show, it kind of makes it like, oh, like that doesn't exist in this world, because that world within this world, this fake world within this fake world is fake. You get what I'm trying to say? I know I'm not making any sense. I'm sounding like a raving lunatic, and I apologize. It's just how like I said, raw emotions. Nevertheless, I'm going to shut up now, because this is going to get nowhere, because it's just circling, and I'm sure most of you are like, what the hell are you talking about, dude? I apologize. It's just too much. It's too much. But nevertheless, like I said, I'd really be interested to see what they do with the second season. Finally circling back. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.